Dr. Marcus Washington, brilliant neurosurgeon turned healthcare tech CEO, stared in disbelief as the flight attendant towered over him, voice dripping with disdain. "Sir, there seems to be a misunderstanding with your seat." 28,000 feet above the Atlantic, surrounded by curious white passengers, Marcus knew this familiar dance. But when they forcibly escorted him from first class to make room for a late-arriving white passenger, Marcus had no idea this would trigger a chain reaction that would destroy careers, expose a corporate conspiracy, and nearly cost him everything he'd built. Could a single act of discrimination bring down an entire corporate empire? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more powerful true stories that expose the ugliness of racism in America. Marcus Washington had never imagined his life would take such a dramatic turn at 28,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. At 42 years old, he had built Regan Med Technologies from scratch, transforming it into a billion-dollar healthcare AI company that was revolutionizing surgical procedures across America. His journey had been nothing short of extraordinary, from the rough streets of Southside Chicago to the prestigious halls of Johns Hopkins Medical School, and finally to the competitive landscape of Silicon Valley, where he had emerged as one of the few black CEOs in the tech industry. Today should have been a moment of triumph. He had just closed a massive Japanese partnership deal worth $500 million that would expand Regan Med's revolutionary neural interface technology across Asia. The exhaustion that weighed on his shoulders as he boarded Flight 2187 was the satisfying kind. The kind that came after days of negotiations and a significant victory. Marcus settled into his premium seat in first class, straightening the lapels of his expensive but understated charcoal gray Tom Ford suit. The cabin's soft lighting reflected off his custom titanium watch, a gift from his wife Gabrielle after their company went public 3 years ago. He had barely placed his leather briefcase under the seat when the first sign of trouble appeared. Flight attendant Veronica Keller approached with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, her gaze immediately dropping to his boarding pass. "May I see your ticket, sir?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already anticipated a problem. Marcus handed it over without comment. Veronica studied it with unusual scrutiny, checking it not once but 3 times against her tablet. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and measured, the same tone he had used countless times in tense business negotiations. "Just verifying," she replied curtly before reluctantly returning the pass and moving along. Marcus couldn't help but notice the stark difference in treatment as other passengers boarded. White executives received warm smiles, were addressed by name, and offered champagne before takeoff. When the attendant returned to Marcus's row, her demeanor remained cold and professional. "Beverage?" she asked without the warmth she had shown to others. When Marcus requested sparkling water, she nodded without meeting his eyes and moved away quickly. Marcus had experienced this type of subtle discrimination throughout his life and career. It was nothing new, and he had learned to choose his battles carefully. This seemed like a minor irritation not worth confronting on what should be a peaceful flight home after his business success. The situation changed dramatically when Richard Holloway, a middle-aged white businessman in an ill-fitting suit, boarded the plane 20 minutes after the scheduled departure time. Marcus observed as Veronica greeted him with unusual deference, practically cooing, "Mr. Holloway, welcome aboard." She immediately checked her tablet and her expression shifted. Within moments, she was making her way back to Marcus's seat, this time flanked by 2 other crew members. "Sir," she began, her voice louder than necessary, "it appears there's been a system error with your reservation." Marcus felt the attention of nearby passengers turning toward him. "That's impossible," he replied calmly, once again producing his boarding pass and the email confirmation on his phone. "I checked in online yesterday and selected this specific seat." Veronica's face hardened. "I'm afraid the computer shows this seat was actually reserved for another passenger. We'll need to relocate you to economy." Marcus stared in disbelief at the 3 crew members now surrounding his seat like sentinels. "I paid for first class," he stated firmly. "I have the receipt and confirmation right here." The female purser who had joined Veronica interjected, "Sir, we need you to comply with crew instructions. This is a federal requirement." Marcus glanced. around the cabin, noticing how the other passengers responded to the confrontation. Most averted their eyes, suddenly finding their magazines or phones fascinating. A few watched with detached curiosity, as though observing an educational nature documentary. Only one passenger, an Asian American woman later identified as Professor Jessica Kim, seemed disturbed by what was happening. Marcus noticed her discreetly positioning her phone, possibly recording the incident. The realization that he was alone in this situation hit Marcus hard. Despite his wealth, his education, his position as a CEO, in this moment, he was being reduced to something less than the white passengers around him. The humiliation burned, but years of navigating discriminatory situations had taught him that escalation rarely benefited him. With deliberate movements, Marcus gathered his belongings, maintaining his dignity despite the injustice. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," he informed them quietly. "I'd like all of your names, please." The crew members exchanged glances, momentarily taken aback by his calm professionalism in the face of their disrespect. Veronica recovered quickly, her smile turning cold. "Of course, sir. We're just following procedure." As Marcus moved toward economy, Veronica couldn't resist adding, "Enjoy your flight in economy. You might feel more comfortable there anyway." The subtle emphasis on comfortable carried an unmistakable meaning that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This wasn't just poor customer service. This was something much more insidious. And Marcus Washington was not a man who let injustice stand unchallenged. The economy cabin felt cramped after the spacious first-class section. The narrower seats a physical reminder of the humiliation Marcus had just endured. As he settled into his reassigned seat, he noticed the Asian American woman who had been discreetly filming the incident now sitting beside him. "That was completely unacceptable what they did to you," she said quietly, once the plane had taken off. "I'm Jessica Kim. I teach sociology at Stanford, specializing in systemic discrimination in corporate America." She held up her phone, showing Marcus the video she had captured. "I got everything. The way they surrounded you, their tone, even that parting comment about you being more comfortable in economy. It's textbook-coded language." The footage was clear, capturing not just the words but the dismissive body language and the stark contrast between how Marcus was treated versus the white passenger who took his seat. Marcus studied Professor Kim's face, weighing his options. "I appreciate you documenting this, but I'm not sure what good it will do. I've dealt with these situations before." Jessica shook her head, her expression resolute. "That's exactly the problem. We all deal with it, and nothing changes. I started recording these incidents after I was denied entry to a faculty event at my own university because security didn't believe I was a professor." She handed Marcus her business card. "The system only changes when we refuse to be silent. This isn't just about a seat on a plane, this is about dignity." Something in her words resonated with Marcus. He had built his company fighting against similar dismissive attitudes, proving his worth again and again despite the doubters. "I plan to file a complaint through their customer service," he said, taking her card. "That's important too," Jessica agreed. "But corporate complaint systems are designed to disperse anger, not deliver justice. They're counting on your formal complaint disappearing into a black hole of bureaucracy." Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her assessment. "Let me think about it. I appreciate you having my back up there." When the plane landed at San Francisco International Airport, Marcus immediately filed a detailed complaint with European Airways at their customer service desk. The representative maintained a neutral expression as she typed his statement, but Marcus noticed how she subtly softened certain details, attempting to frame the incident as a misunderstanding rather than discrimination. He insisted she record his account verbatim. She reluctantly complied, handing him a complaint reference number and assuring him someone would contact him within 10 business days. Walking away, Marcus knew from experience that this would likely result in nothing more than a form letter, and perhaps a voucher for a future flight, tacitly suggesting that his dignity could be purchased for the price of a discount ticket. True to his prediction, the only response he received was an automated email thanking him for his feedback and promising to use it to improve our service. Meanwhile, Jessica Kim had posted the video on her social media accounts with Marcus's permission, adding context about his accomplishments as a neurosurgeon and tech innovator. The footage spread like wildfire, gaining millions of views overnight as viewers expressed outrage at the blatant discrimination. Within 24 hours, where flying while black and European Airways racism were trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, first the digital platforms, then cable news, and finally the major networks. Marcus's phone exploded with media, requests, texts from friends and family, and emails from his executive team urging him to capitalize on the moment with brand partnerships and speaking opportunities. But Marcus wasn't interested in leveraging this humiliation for publicity. "This isn't about marketing," he told his anxious PR director. "This is about accountability." European Airways' initial response only intensified the backlash. Their social media team posted a generic statement. "European Airways is investigating the reported incident. We take all customer concerns seriously and are committed to ensuring a welcoming environment for all passengers. While we regret any misunderstanding, we remind our valued customers that compliance with crew instructions is required by federal law." The statement implicitly characterized Marcus as uncooperative, fueling further outrage online. The company's attempt to minimize the incident backfired spectacularly, as more people shared the video, now enhanced with arrows pointing out the crew members' facial expressions and body language. Marcus received a call from William Bradshaw, European Airways CEO, offering a $50,000 settlement with a confidentiality clause that would prevent Marcus from discussing the incident publicly. "We'd like to put this unfortunate situation behind us," Bradshaw said smoothly. Marcus declined immediately. "This isn't about money, Mr. Bradshaw. It's about dignity and accountability." The call ended with Bradshaw's thinly veiled warning. "I hope you understand the complexities of these situations, Dr. Washington. The court of public opinion can be quite fickle." As the controversy grew, the flight crew members began receiving their own backlash. Veronica Keller and her colleagues found themselves identified online, their social media profiles flooded with angry comments. Some received threats which Marcus publicly condemned, stating that intimidation was never acceptable. However, rather than acknowledging their role in the situation, Veronica and the other crew members began giving interviews portraying themselves as victims. "We were just following protocol," Veronica claimed to a sympathetic reporter. "Now my life is being threatened because this passenger wasn't satisfied with our attempt to resolve a booking error." She directly blamed Marcus for the mob mentality online, suggesting he had orchestrated the response for publicity. Watching her interview, Marcus realized this was no longer about a single incident on a plane. It had become a battle for the narrative itself, and European Airways was determined to cast him as the villain rather than confront their own discriminatory practices. Have you ever wondered how quickly a corporation will try to destroy someone's reputation to protect their bottom line? As European Airways realized the viral video wouldn't simply disappear, they shifted strategies from dismissiveness to aggressive counterattack. Within 48 hours of the video passing 10 million views, sources familiar with the incident began contacting media outlets with a different version of events. These anonymous informants claimed Marcus had been intoxicated on the flight, had verbally abused the flight attendants, and had demanded special treatment because of his status. He kept saying, "Do you know who I am?" and threatening to get everyone fired, one supposed witness told a tabloid news site. Despite the video evidence contradicting these claims, several outlets ran with the new narrative, publishing headlines like, "Airline Incident, Was CEO Playing the Race Card?" and "Sources Reveal Disruptive Behavior Behind Viral Plane Video." The coordinated smear campaign created exactly the doubt European Airways hoped for. Social media users began questioning the original video, suggesting it didn't show the full context. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of having to defend his character and behavior despite video evidence supporting his account. More disturbingly, the backlash began affecting his company. Regan Med's board members called an emergency meeting, expressing concerns about the negative publicity. "The Japanese are particularly sensitive about public controversies," board member Lawrence Chen explained, referencing their recent $500 million partnership. "They're asking questions about stability and leadership." Marcus felt blindsided by their lack of support. These were people who had celebrated his vision and leadership for years, Yet now they seemed ready to distance themselves at the first sign of controversy. His COO, Thomas Reed, a white man who had been with the company since its early days, suggested letting the matter drop. "The publicity isn't worth the distraction, Marcus," he advised. "European Airways is a giant. They have the resources to drag this out indefinitely. Meanwhile, we have a company to run." Marcus studied Thomas's face, wondering if he truly understood what was at stake. "So I should just accept being humiliated because it's inconvenient to fight back?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I'm thinking about what's best for Regan Med. Sometimes you have to pick your battles." Jessica Kim was facing her own form of retaliation. European Airways legal department contacted Stanford University, suggesting that her recording and posting of the video constituted unprofessional behavior unbecoming of faculty. They implied that her actions could expose the university to legal liability. The university president, always cautious about donor relationships, called Jessica in for a meeting about ethical concerns regarding her social media conduct. "Professor Kim," he began gravely, "while the university supports academic freedom, your involvement in this situation raises questions about professional boundaries." Jessica sat stunned as he continued. "European Airways is concerned about privacy violations. Several board members have also expressed concerns about potential impacts on our corporate partnerships." Jessica recognized the implicit threat: back down or risk your career. The message was clear. Even with tenure, even with video evidence, even with public support, the system had ways of punishing those who challenged it. Meanwhile, Richard Holloway, the white passenger who had been given Marcus's seat, was identified as a major European Airways investor with connections to their parent company. Rather than maintaining a low profile, Holloway gave several interviews, portraying himself as an innocent bystander, unfairly dragged into controversy. "I had no idea there was any issue with the seat assignment," he told Business Insider. "I simply boarded with my confirmed first-class ticket and was directed to my seat. Whatever transpired between Dr. Washington and the crew had nothing to do with me." He expressed sympathy for Marcus's perception of events, while subtly reinforcing the airline's narrative about a simple booking error. What Holloway failed to mention was his 20-year friendship with European Airways CEO William Bradshaw, or his position on the board of Global Trans Holdings, the airline's parent company. The attacks became more personal as Marcus discovered racist comments appearing on Regan Med's social media accounts and product review sites. Anonymous users questioned the safety of medical devices designed by someone who plays the race card, and suggested hospitals should reconsider their contracts with Regan Med. Potential investors began expressing hesitation about previously enthusiastic commitments, citing concerns about management stability. A venture capital firm, indefinitely, postponed a scheduled meeting about funding Regan Med's newest neural interface project. Marcus's assistant reported receiving calls from journalists asking about workplace discrimination lawsuits against Marcus or Regan Med, despite no such lawsuits ever being filed. It became increasingly clear that this was no longer about an incident on a plane. Someone was systematically attempting to destroy not just Marcus's reputation but everything he had built. Do you think corporations should be allowed to retaliate against customers who speak out about discrimination? Has a company ever tried to silence you when you complained about poor treatment? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe businesses should be held accountable for discriminatory practices, and number 2 if you think Marcus should have just accepted the airline's settlement offer and moved on. Hit that like button if you're outraged by European Airways' smear campaign, and subscribe to hear what happens next in this shocking true story. As Marcus watched his professional reputation being systematically dismantled, he faced a critical decision: back down to save his company or fight back against a system designed to silence him. But what would happen when he discovered who was really orchestrating this campaign against him? The truth was far more sinister than he could have imagined. Marcus Washington had always prided himself on self-reliance, building his success through personal determination and individual effort. But as the coordinated attacks intensified, he realized this was not a battle he could win alone. With his company under siege and his reputation being systematically dismantled, Marcus made a call to Elaine Johnson, a prominent civil rights attorney known for taking on corporate giants. Their initial meeting in her downtown San Francisco office revealed a disturbing pattern. "You're not the first, Dr. Washington," Johnson said, spreading folders across her desk. "European Airways has a history of similar incidents." She had been tracking discrimination cases against the airline for years, building a database of complaints that never made it to court. They've quietly settled 26 cases in the past 5 years, all involving passengers of color being removed or downgraded from premium cabins. All settlements included strict confidentiality clauses. Marcus leaned forward, examining the documentation. "So this is systematic?" Johnson nodded gravely. "European Airways has perfected the art of making these incidents disappear. A private apology, a 5-figure settlement, and a legally binding silence. Your case is different only because Professor Kim captured it on video, and you refused their hush money." Days after hiring Johnson, Marcus received an unexpected email from a current European Airways employee using an anonymous account. The message was brief. "Not all of us support what happened to you. Some of us have been trying to speak up internally for years. Can we meet? I have information." After careful security arrangements, Marcus met Michael Torres, a flight attendant who had been with European Airways for 15 years. In a quiet corner of a busy restaurant, Torres revealed the airline's unwritten policy called the Passenger Comfort Initiative. "It's coded language," Torres explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Staff are subtly encouraged to maintain passenger cabin demographic balance by keeping first class predominantly white. The training never explicitly mentions race, but the message is clear in how it's presented and enforced." Torres revealed that flight attendants received bonuses based on passenger satisfaction scores, which internal data showed were highest when this balance was maintained. "Many of us hate it, but speaking up means losing your job. I've seen colleagues disciplined for not managing cabin dynamics appropriately when they failed to find reasons to upgrade white passengers or downgrade passengers of color." Torres provided Marcus with internal memos, training materials, and email exchanges that, while carefully worded to avoid explicit discrimination, painted a damning picture when viewed collectively. "I'm risking everything by talking to you," Torres admitted. "But what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. It's policy disguised as customer experience management." Jessica Kim faced her university ethics committee hearing with trepidation, but refused to back down. "The recording was made in a public space where there is no expectation of privacy," she argued confidently. "More importantly, it documented a civil rights violation. If the university punishes faculty for documenting injustice, what message does that send to our students?" As the committee deliberated, an unexpected wave of support emerged. Former students began sharing their own experiences of discrimination, along with stories of how Professor Kim's guidance had helped them navigate hostile environments. Alumni threatened to withhold donations if the university yielded to corporate pressure. Faced with mounting public support for Jessica, the university administration retreated, issuing a carefully worded statement supporting academic freedom and the documentation of societal issues as part of scholarly research. The victory was bittersweet for Jessica, who recognized that many others facing similar pressure lacked her platform and public support. Her experience only strengthened her commitment to standing with Marcus against European Airways. Through social media outreach, Marcus discovered an online support group of previous European Airways discrimination victims. Many had signed NDAs as part of settlements but were willing to share their experiences anonymously. The patterns were strikingly similar. Passengers of color in first class or business class being questioned about their tickets, accused of disruptive behavior, or suddenly informed of system errors requiring their relocation to economy. A Kenyan diplomat described being moved from first class despite his diplomatic status. A Japanese executive recounted being asked to prove she was a business class passenger 3 separate times during one flight. A famous black musician described being denied pre-flight champagne until a white passenger recognized him and complained on his behalf. All had received settlement offers contingent on their silence. Together with Elaine Johnson, Marcus began, building a class action case, giving these silenced victims hope that their experiences might finally lead to systemic change, rather than individual payoffs. For many, the opportunity to be part of something larger than their individual humiliation provided a healing that money could never offer. As their alliance grew stronger, Marcus began to sense a shift in momentum. The carefully crafted narrative European Airways had created was beginning to unravel as more people came forward with similar experiences. Michael Torres connected them with other whistleblowers within the airline industry who confirmed that discriminatory practices weren't limited to European Airways but were particularly egregious there. Jessica's academic colleagues began conducting formal research into discrimination patterns across the airline industry, bringing scholarly rigor to what had previously been dismissed as anecdotal complaints. Even within ReganMed, the initial hesitation from board members began to transform into cautious support as they recognized that Marcus's stand aligned with their company's values of innovation and challenging harmful status quos. For the first time since the incident, Marcus felt genuine hope that meaningful change might emerge from his humiliation. What he didn't yet realize was that the forces aligned against him were far more powerful and ruthless than he had imagined, and they were about to escalate their campaign to destroy him completely. As Marcus and his growing alliance began gaining momentum, European Airways abandoned all pretense of resolving the situation amicably. The airline hired Sentinel Strategic, a crisis management firm notorious for its aggressive tactics against corporate critics. Within days, Marcus received notice that his medical license was under review, based on anonymous complaints about his surgical practice, despite the fact that he hadn't performed surgery in nearly 5 years since founding ReganMed. The California Medical Board informed him that they had received multiple reports questioning his competency and ethics during his time at Johns Hopkins. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Simultaneously, the Internal Revenue Service notified ReganMed of a comprehensive tax audit covering the past 7 years of operations. The company's CFO, Victoria Huang, was baffled. "We just completed a voluntary compliance review last year with 0 issues," she told Marcus. "This isn't random. Someone pulled strings to make this happen." The attacks quickly became more personal and threatening. Marcus's home address was leaked online, forcing him to hire security for his family after receiving death threats and racial slurs through every available channel. His children, 15-year-old Michael and 12-year-old Zoe, faced sudden bullying at their private school, with classmates repeating smears their parents had clearly heard from media coverage. Marcus found himself taking calls from his wife Gabrielle while on business trips as she described strange cars parked outside their home and unknown callers who hung up when she answered. Gabrielle, a typically unflappable former prosecutor, now urged him to consider dropping the case. "I believe in what you're fighting for," she told him during a tense late-night conversation in their kitchen. "But these people play dirty. They're coming after our family, Marcus. Is proving a point worth putting Michael and Zoe at risk?" Marcus had no easy answer. The principles at stake felt too important to abandon, but watching his family suffer cut him deeply. "Maybe we should send the kids to stay with your parents in Chicago until this blows over," he suggested, hating the fact that his children might need to flee their home because he had stood up against discrimination. The pressure mounted at ReganMed as well. The company board called an emergency meeting after investors began pulling out of deals, citing leadership controversies as their reason for withdrawal. The stock price dropped 18% in a single day of trading as market analysts questioned whether Marcus's personal crusade was interfering with his corporate responsibilities. Several board members suggested that Marcus take a temporary leave of absence until the controversy blows over, a euphemism for his permanent removal if the situation continued. Most troubling to Marcus was the silence from his trusted COO, Thomas Reed. During board meetings where Marcus's leadership was being questioned, Thomas remained conspicuously quiet, neither defending Marcus nor joining the criticism. After years of friendship and partnership building ReganMed together, Thomas's neutrality felt like betrayal. When Marcus confronted him privately, Thomas shrugged. "I'm trying to maintain objectivity, Marcus. The board members have valid concerns about company stability." The answer felt rehearsed, inauthentic, leaving Marcus with a growing sense of isolation even within the company he had founded. Through his attorney Elaine Johnson, Marcus discovered that Sentinel Strategic had launched a comprehensive investigation into his entire life. They had interviewed ex-girlfriends from his college days, colleagues from his residency, neighbors from every apartment he had ever rented, all seeking damaging information. Most refused to cooperate, but some innocuous comments were twisted into damaging narratives. A former neighbor recalled Marcus arguing with a girlfriend, which became a story about volatile tendencies in a gossip blog. A disagreement with a hospital administrator during his residency was reframed as inability to accept authority. Most disturbing was a story about a patient who had died during Marcus's surgical residency. The case had been thoroughly reviewed, at the time, with Marcus found to have followed all proper protocols in an inherently high-risk procedure. Now Sentinel Strategic had somehow obtained confidential medical records and was feeding a twisted version to friendly media outlets, implying negligence where none had existed. The story ran under headlines like, "Washington's Troubled Medical Past," "What Region Med Investors Don't Know," and "Surgical Death Raises Questions About CEO's Judgment." The culmination of these attacks came when Marcus discovered surveillance equipment in both his office and home. After noticing unusual battery drain on his devices and feeling increasingly certain that his private conversations were being leaked, Marcus hired security specialists to sweep his environments. They discovered cameras hidden in smoke detectors and light fixtures, along with sophisticated listening devices in his office phone and home entertainment system. The discovery sent chills through Marcus's entire family. Someone was watching their every move, listening to their most private conversations. Even Zoe's bedroom had not been spared, a violation that filled Marcus with cold rage. The security expert confirmed these were professional-grade devices requiring significant resources to install and monitor. "This isn't amateur hour," he told Marcus gravely. "You've made some powerful enemies." As Marcus stared at the collection of bugs removed from his home, the full weight of what he was facing became clear. This was no longer about a seat on an airplane or even about discrimination. Someone with virtually unlimited resources was determined to destroy him completely, and they were playing by no rules whatsoever. The question was no longer whether he could win this fight, but whether he and his family would survive it. Marcus Washington had always been a careful strategist, a skill that had served him well in both medicine and business. Now, facing enemies who seemed to anticipate his every move, he decided to use their surveillance against them. In a private conversation with Gabrielle that he knew would be monitored, Marcus deliberately mentioned crucial evidence hidden at their rarely used lake house in Tahoe. "I've stored backups there that nobody knows about," he told her, squeezing her hand, to indicate this was misinformation. "If anything happens to me, everything is in the wall safe behind the family photo in the study." That night, Marcus positioned security personnel around the property, while he and Gabrielle stayed at a hotel under assumed names. At 2 a.m, the silent alarm triggered. Security footage showed a figure skillfully picking the lock and disabling what should have been the primary alarm system. The intruder moved with purpose directly to the study, clearly familiar with the layout of a house he had never legitimately entered. When the security team confronted the man as he was attempting to open the wall safe, Marcus received the shock of his life. The intruder was Thomas Reed, his COO and supposed friend of 15 years. Under the custody of Marcus's private security team, with irrefutable evidence of breaking and entering, Thomas's composed corporate demeanor crumbled. "You don't understand who you're up against, Marcus," he said, his voice trembling with either fear or anger. "They own judges, politicians, media outlets. They'll destroy you completely." When Marcus demanded to know who they were, Thomas finally confessed the truth. He had been working with Global Trans Holdings, European Airways parent company, for over a year. His mission: to provide insider information about Region Med's operations, vulnerabilities, and Marcus's personal life. "They approached me 18 months ago," Thomas admitted, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "They said they'd make me CEO after they acquired Region Med. All I had to do was help them position the company for takeover." The betrayal cut deeper than any business rivalry ever could. This was the man who had stood beside Marcus at his children's birthdays, who had celebrated every Region Med milestone as if it were his own achievement. "So, the incident on the plane," Marcus said slowly, the pieces finally coming together. "That wasn't random." Thomas shook his head. "They knew your travel schedule, your seat preference, everything. Richard Holloway was specifically sent to trigger the confrontation. They needed something to destabilize you publicly, to make you look unstable and damage Region Med's stock price." The entire humiliating incident had been engineered as the opening move in a corporate takeover strategy, using racial discrimination as a deliberate weapon. Thomas revealed that Global Trans CEO Victor Harrington had a history with Marcus that preceded Region Med. Early in his career, Marcus had developed groundbreaking neural interface patents that Harrington's previous medical technology company had attempted to acquire. Marcus had refused their lowball offer, believing in the technology's greater potential. "Harrington never forgave you for that," Thomas explained. "He told me he's been waiting for the right moment to put you in your place for years. When you built Region Med into a billion-dollar company using those same patents, it became personal for him." The discrimination incident on the European Airways flight hadn't just been a convenient corporate tactic, it had been the satisfaction of a racial animus that had festered for years in the mind of a powerful white executive who couldn't accept being outmaneuvered by a black surgeon from Chicago's South Side. Marcus methodically recorded Thomas's entire confession on multiple devices, ensuring the evidence couldn't be easily destroyed. When he mentioned using the recording to expose Global Trans, Thomas's expression darkened. "You don't get it, Marcus. These people will destroy the evidence and you before you can use it. They have people inside law enforcement, regulatory agencies, everywhere. Why do you think your medical license suddenly came under review? How do you think they got those patient records from Johns Hopkins? The system is designed to protect them, not you." The following morning, Thomas Reed publicly resigned from Region Med, citing ethical concerns about Marcus's leadership in an exclusive interview with the Wall Street Journal. "While I have tremendous respect for what Dr. Washington has built," he stated with practiced sincerity, "recent events have raised serious questions about judgment and corporate governance that I cannot in good conscience ignore." Within hours, 3 board members who had previously expressed concerns about Marcus's distraction also resigned, releasing a joint statement about their fiduciary duty to shareholders. Region Med's stock immediately plummeted further, losing nearly 30% of its value by market close. Investment firms began publishing analyses questioning the company's future viability with such significant leadership instability. Potential partners delayed or canceled negotiations, citing uncertain circumstances. Marcus watched years of painstaking work unraveling before his eyes, powerless to stop the exodus of confidence that Thomas's betrayal had triggered. The recording of Thomas's confession, which should have been damning evidence against Global Trans, suddenly seemed inadequate against the machinery of power now fully deployed against him. Without Thomas's testimony, which he would surely recant under pressure from Global Trans, the recording would be dismissed as doctored or taken out of context. Marcus found himself fighting enemies on all sides, with his company slipping through, his fingers and his reputation in tatters. That evening, Marcus received an unexpected call from Jessica Kim. "I've been digging into Richard Holloway and Global Trans," she said, without preamble. "You need to see what I found, but not over the phone, not in your office, and definitely not at your home." Her voice carried an urgency that told Marcus this wasn't academic curiosity, but something potentially game-changing. They agreed to meet at a public library, using a protocol designed by Marcus's security team to ensure they weren't followed. As Marcus ended the call, he glanced at a photo of his family on his desk. Michael and Zoe's smiling faces reminded him why this fight mattered beyond his own reputation or even Region Med's survival. He was showing his children what it meant to stand against injustice, even when the cost was devastating. Whether he would still have a company or career when this was over remained uncertain, but he was determined that his children would never doubt their father had fought with everything he had against a system designed to humiliate and control people who looked like them. With renewed determination, Marcus prepared to meet Jessica, unaware that she was about to reveal a conspiracy far more extensive and sinister than even he had imagined. Have you ever discovered that what seemed like an isolated injustice was actually part of a much larger pattern of corruption? As Marcus Washington met with Jessica Kim in the quiet corner of a public library, surrounded by bookshelves that provided both privacy and the comforting anonymity of a public space, he was about to learn that his ordeal was just the visible tip of a massive, submerged system of corporate predation. "I've been researching Global Trans Holdings for weeks," Jessica explained, spreading printouts across the table. "They have a systematic practice of targeting minority-owned businesses, especially those in cutting-edge industries." Her research revealed a disturbing pattern spanning more than 5 years. Global Trans would identify successful companies founded by people of color, particularly those with innovative technologies, then deploy a methodical strategy to devalue and acquire them at fraction of their worth. "Look at these 7 cases," Jessica continued, pointing to timeline charts. "In each instance, the founder faced a sudden crisis, often something that leveraged racial stereotypes. Negative press followed, investors pulled out, and then Global Trans appeared as a white knight, offering to rescue the company at 30 to 50% below market value." Marcus recognized the playbook immediately. It was happening to him in real time, each step following the same choreography that had devastated other minority entrepreneurs before him. Jessica's research had uncovered another troubling connection. Richard Holloway, the passenger who took your seat, sits on the boards of both Global Trans and Stanford University, she revealed, showing Marcus the overlapping board memberships. "That explains why the university administration came after me so aggressively. The day after I posted your video, Holloway called the university president personally." The pieces were falling into place, revealing the extent of Global Trans's influence across seemingly unrelated institutions. Their tentacles reached into academia, media, regulatory agencies, and even law enforcement, creating an almost impenetrable web of protection for their predatory practices. Most disturbing was Jessica's discovery that Global Trans had contributed significantly to political campaigns of officials who oversaw airline industry regulations and corporate acquisition reviews. "They've essentially purchased immunity from oversight," Jessica concluded. "No regulatory body has ever challenged their acquisitions or business practices, despite clear patterns that should have triggered antitrust investigations years ago." As Marcus absorbed the scope of what they were facing, his phone buzzed with a text from Michael Torres, the European Airways whistleblower. "Found internal docs proving discrimination policy, not safe to meet, being watched." Marcus immediately tried calling back, but Torres didn't answer. Hours later, when Torres still hadn't responded to multiple messages, Marcus asked his security team to check on him. They reported that Torres's apartment had been ransacked, with clear signs of a violent struggle. Local police showed minimal interest in investigating, treating it as a routine burglary despite Marcus's insistence that Torres was in danger because of his whistleblowing. "Sir, we have dozens of break-ins every week," the detective told Marcus dismissively. "No evidence this is anything more than bad luck and a bad neighborhood." The casual dismissal carried the same tone of implicit bias that Marcus had heard countless times throughout his life. Without evidence of Global Trans's involvement, the detective had automatically assumed Torres's situation warranted minimal concern. Another example of how systemic prejudice served corporate interests. 3 days later, Marcus received an anonymous package at Regan Med's office, bypassing the enhanced security protocols he had recently implemented. Inside was a USB drive containing surveillance photos of his family going about their daily routines, medical records of his children, including Zoe's recent orthodontist appointment, and a simple message: "Drop it all or lose everything." The implied threat to his children crystallized everything for Marcus. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about the safety of the people he loved most. But rather than intimidating him into submission as intended, the threat transformed Marcus's careful strategic approach into cold, immovable resolve. Someone had crossed an unforgivable line. "They think threatening my children will make me back down," he told Gabrielle that night as they looked at the photos together. "They don't understand that there's nothing more dangerous than a parent protecting their family." For the first time since the ordeal began, Gabrielle didn't urge caution. Instead, she squeezed his hand and said, Then let's end this. Not just for us, but for every family they've threatened before. Using his medical connections, Marcus began a systematic search for Michael Torres, calling hospitals throughout the region. His persistence paid off when a nurse at a rural facility 70 miles outside San Francisco recognized Torres's description. Patient admitted 3 days ago after a hit-and-run accident, she confirmed. No identification on him when he was brought in. Marcus immediately drove to the hospital, finding Torres in serious but stable condition, with multiple fractures and a concussion. Torres regained consciousness briefly when Marcus entered the room. "Not accident," he whispered. "Followed me. Forced off road." With shaking hands, Torres passed Marcus a small paper with login credentials for a cloud storage account. Everything there. The documents, emails, training materials, proves policy comes from top. Before Marcus could ask more questions, Torres lost consciousness again. The attending physician explained that Torres had suffered internal bleeding and would need additional surgery. As Marcus left the hospital, he noticed a black SUV with tinted windows in the parking lot, its engine running. Someone was still watching Torres, waiting for exactly the kind of visit Marcus had just made. Marcus exited through a service entrance, taking a circuitous route back to the city, acutely aware that he might be leading Global Trans's agents directly to the evidence that could finally expose their entire operation. Would you risk everything to expose corruption, even when facing threats to your family? Have you ever witnessed a company using its power to silence someone who spoke up about wrongdoing? Comment number 1, if you believe whistleblowers like Michael Torres are heroes who deserve protection. Or number 2, if you think Marcus should prioritize his family's safety and walk away. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how far Global Trans went to destroy Marcus's life. And subscribe to find out what happens when Marcus finally fights back with the evidence Michael risked his life to provide. The stakes couldn't be higher, as Marcus prepared to meet journalists with evidence that could expose not just European Airways discrimination, but Global Trans's entire predatory system. But with powerful enemies tracking his every move, would he even make it to that meeting? Alive? And what would happen to his family while he fought this battle? Armed with Michael Torres's cloud drive credentials and the extensive documentation Jessica had compiled, Marcus carefully planned his next move. The evidence they now possessed could expose not just European Airways discriminatory practices, but the entire predatory system Global Trans had constructed to target minority-owned businesses. Marcus arranged to meet a carefully selected group of journalists at the Four Seasons Hotel, choosing a public location to minimize the risk of another direct attack. He took extraordinary precautions, changing vehicles 3 times en route and using decoys to confuse potential surveillance. Despite these measures, Marcus remained hyper-vigilant, acutely aware that Global Trans had seemingly unlimited resources to track his movements. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan when Marcus entered the hired car service that would take him to the final meeting point. The driver, a middle-aged man named Carl according to his ID badge, made casual conversation as they navigated through San Francisco's busy streets. "Traffic's bad today. Mind if I take an alternate route?" Before Marcus could properly assess the question, he noticed they were turning away from the downtown area, heading instead toward the industrial district south of the city. "This isn't the way to the Four Seasons," Marcus said sharply, immediately, reaching for his phone. Carl's demeanor changed instantly. "Phone down," he ordered, his friendly tone vanishing as he locked the doors and accelerated. In the rearview mirror, Marcus spotted 2 black SUVs with tinted windows falling into formation behind them, the same model he'd seen at the hospital watching Michael Torres. The car sped through increasingly desolate streets lined with abandoned warehouses and shuttered factories. Marcus quickly assessed his options, calculating the risk of attempting to wrest control of the vehicle versus allowing himself to be taken to whatever destination they had planned. His decision was made for him when the car turned into an empty parking lot surrounded by dilapidated buildings, effectively isolated from any potential witnesses. The 2 SUVs pulled in behind them, blocking any escape route. "End of the line, Dr. Washington," Carl announced, turning to reveal a handgun now pointed casually in Marcus's direction. "Some people want to have a conversation with you." 4. Men in dark suits emerged from the SUVs, their expressions coldly professional as they approached the vehicle. Marcus recognized the implicit threat: come quietly or face immediate violence. In that moment, Marcus recalled the survival instincts he'd developed growing up in Chicago's South Side, where situational awareness had been as important as academic excellence in determining his future. As Carl momentarily turned to acknowledge his colleagues, Marcus executed a swift, decisive move, striking the man's wrist to dislodge the weapon while simultaneously unlocking the door with his other hand. The gun discharged in the confined space, the bullet shattering the windshield as Marcus threw himself from the vehicle. What followed was a desperate chase through the labyrinthine industrial complex. Marcus used the maze of buildings to his advantage, drawing on physical conditioning maintained despite his executive lifestyle. His pursuers, clearly professional security personnel rather than common thugs, coordinated their efforts with practiced efficiency, using radios to track his movements and attempt to cut off escape routes. During the pursuit, Marcus sustained a deep laceration to his arm from broken glass as he forced entry into an abandoned manufacturing facility, using the vast machinery-filled space to create distance between himself and his attackers. After nearly 30 minutes of this deadly game, Marcus managed to reach a perimeter fence adjacent to an active construction site where workers provided both witnesses and access to emergency services. As sirens approached, his pursuers melted away, unwilling to continue their pursuit with potential witnesses and law enforcement arriving. Marcus collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss as construction workers rushed to his aid, one of them using a belt as a makeshift tourniquet for his injured arm. When police arrived at the scene, Marcus expected immediate action given the clear attempt on his life. Instead, he found himself treated with suspicion bordering on hostility. "We found something interesting in the car you abandoned," the detective said, producing an evidence bag containing several packets of cocaine. "Want to explain this?" Despite Marcus's detailed account of the kidnapping attempt and his insistence that the drugs had been planted, the officers focused their questions on his known associates and recreational activities. Marcus recognized the familiar pattern of assumption and bias, the automatic presumption of guilt that followed black men regardless of their position or accomplishments. Even with his arm still bleeding through hastily applied bandages, even with multiple witnesses confirming he had been pursued by armed men, the detective continued to treat Marcus as a suspect rather than a victim. "Funny how you claim these men were trying to kill you, yet you don't have a single description we can use," the detective noted with obvious skepticism. "Almost like you're making this up to cover for a drug deal gone bad." Attorney Elaine Johnson arrived at the police station like an avenging angel, accompanied by a medical team and journalists already briefed on Global Trans's pattern of intimidation. "My client has suffered a kidnapping attempt and requires immediate medical attention," she announced loudly enough for everyone in the precinct to hear. "Any further questioning will take place at the hospital, with me present, after he receives proper care." Her commanding presence and the media witnesses created immediate accountability, forcing the police to acknowledge the severity of the situation. As paramedics treated his injuries, Marcus provided Elaine with access codes to digital copies of Torres's evidence, which she immediately dispatched to secure locations. "They're getting desperate," Elaine observed as doctors stitched Marcus's arm. "This level of direct violence means we're close to something they truly fear being exposed." Marcus nodded grimly. "They're willing to kill me to protect their system. We need to assume they'll target everyone involved." While Marcus had been fighting for his life in the abandoned industrial complex, Jessica Kim had been carefully publishing key documents from Torres's cloud drive through academic channels, establishing an evidentiary trail that couldn't be easily eliminated. The evidence was now spreading beyond Global Trans's ability to contain it, a digital wildfire exposing decades of systematic discrimination and corporate predation. As Marcus recovered in the hospital under police protection, he received the news that Global Trans had made their endgame move. The company had issued a public offer to acquire Regan Med Technologies at 40% below its market value, presenting the offer as a rescue of a company in crisis. Given the unfortunate controversies surrounding Dr. Washington's leadership and the resulting market instability, Global Trans Holdings believes this acquisition represents the best path forward for ReganMed's innovative technologies and its shareholders. The press release stated with calculated concern. The remaining board members, rattled by Thomas's betrayal and the company's plummeting stock price, had given Marcus 24 hours to accept the offer before they would vote to force the sale regardless of his position as founder. The trap that had been set months ago with his humiliation on European Airways Flight 2187 was now closing around everything he had built. Marcus's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Take the offer. Walk away with your life and what's left of your reputation. Last chance." The message contained a recent photo of his children at school, a final reminder of what Global Trans could take from him if he continued to resist. As Marcus stared at the image of Michael and Zoe, unaware that they were being watched by people who would use them as leverage against their father, he made his decision. Global Trans had miscalculated profoundly. They had assumed that threatening his family would force his surrender. Instead, it had removed any remaining restraint or hesitation from Marcus Washington's response. The time for careful strategy and measured reactions was over. Now, it was war. Instead of capitulating to Global Trans's demands, Marcus Washington executed a bold counteroffensive that caught his enemies completely off guard. From his hospital bed, still recovering from the injuries sustained during the kidnapping attempt, Marcus called an emergency virtual shareholder meeting. Using a secure platform developed by ReganMed's own cybersecurity team, he addressed investors, board members, and key stakeholders simultaneously, presenting the complete constellation of evidence against Global Trans Holdings. "What I'm about to share isn't just about one incident on an airplane," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his physical condition. "This is about a systematic campaign to target successful minority-owned businesses, devalue them through manufactured crises and acquire their assets at predatory prices." With methodical precision, Marcus walked the participants through the evidence Michael Torres had risked his life to provide, including internal European Airways documents explicitly outlining the Passenger Comfort Initiative and its racial targeting parameters. He revealed emails between Global Trans executives and European Airways management coordinating the incident on his flight, proving that Richard Holloway's presence and the crew's actions had been orchestrated specifically to create a public relations crisis for Marcus and ReganMed. Most damning was the evidence connecting Global Trans to the 7 previous cases Jessica Kim had identified, showing identical patterns of targeting, crisis creation, and predatory acquisition of minority-owned businesses. Marcus played the recorded confession from Thomas Reed, his former COO, admitting his role as Global Trans's inside man and revealing CEO Victor Harrington's personal vendetta. "This wasn't just business," Marcus told the stunned shareholders. "This was a deliberate effort to put me in my place for refusing to sell my early patents to Harrington years ago. They weaponized racial discrimination as a business tactic, confident that the system would protect them as it always has." The presentation included financial analyses demonstrating how Global Trans had systematically undervalued companies founded by people of color compared to similar acquisitions of white-owned businesses. The pattern was unmistakable, revealing a corporate strategy built on exploiting societal prejudice for financial gain. As Marcus concluded his presentation, he announced, "Global Trans didn't just come after me, they threatened my children. They attacked people who tried to help expose the truth. They believed their power made them untouchable. Today, we prove them wrong." Simultaneously with Marcus's shareholder address, Jessica Kim orchestrated a massive social media campaign, coordinating the release of testimony from dozens of discrimination victims across multiple industries. The hashtag #DaverFlyingWhileBlack expanded to #ExistingWhileBlack as people shared their experiences of systemic discrimination in corporate America. Former employees from Global Trans subsidiaries came forward with their own stories of toxic internal cultures and explicit directives to devalue minority-owned acquisition targets. Celebrities and influencers who had experienced similar treatment on European Airways amplified these messages, creating a groundswell of public attention that mainstream media could no longer ignore. Jessica's academic colleagues contributed analyses demonstrating the economic impact of discriminatory corporate practices, estimating billions in lost value for minority entrepreneurs due to predatory acquisition tactics like those employed by Global Trans. What began as a single incident on an airplane had transformed into a national conversation about the intersection of corporate power and racial injustice. While public opinion shifted dramatically, Marcus's medical colleagues launched their own initiative to defend his professional reputation. Leading neurosurgeons who had trained with Marcus or followed his pioneering work published an open letter condemning the attempts to question his medical expertise and ethics. Former patients shared stories of his exceptional care, directly contradicting the manufactured negligence claims. The California Medical Board issued a statement confirming that the anonymous complaints against Marcus had been reviewed and dismissed as without merit and potentially malicious in nature. A prominent Johns Hopkins administrator publicly apologized for the unauthorized release of patient records, announcing an internal investigation into how confidential medical information had been accessed and leaked to Sentinel Strategic. The smear campaign that had initially damaged Marcus's reputation now backfired completely, highlighting the extraordinary lengths to which his opponents had gone to destroy him professionally. The thumb drive threatening Marcus's family became another turning point when Gabrielle Washington leveraged her experience as a former prosecutor. Working with cybersecurity experts, she traced the digital fingerprints on the drive back to Sentinel Strategic's servers. With irrefutable evidence of corporate espionage, stalking, and threatening minors, Gabrielle filed criminal charges against both the firm and its Global Trans clients. They thought threatening our children would be their most effective weapon, Gabrielle told reporters outside the federal courthouse. Instead, it's the action that will bring their entire operation down. The FBI opened an investigation into Sentinel Strategic's tactics across multiple cases, with agents seizing servers and documents from their headquarters. Former clients began distancing themselves from the firm, unwilling to be associated with an organization that targeted children as leverage in corporate disputes. What had seemed like an untouchable power structure weeks earlier was now crumbling under the weight of its own overreach and arrogance. The most stunning element of Marcus's reversal came in the financial arena. Anticipating Global Trans's takeover attempt months earlier, Marcus had quietly secured commitments from loyal investors, including the Japanese partners who had maintained faith in his leadership despite the controversy. Together, they had accumulated enough capital and proxy votes to block any hostile acquisition attempt. As Global Trans's predatory practices became public knowledge, their stock plummeted. Ironically, creating the same crisis of investor confidence they had manufactured for ReganMed. Major institutional investors began divesting from Global Trans, citing ethical concerns and potential legal liabilities. Within a week of Marcus's shareholder presentation, ReganMed's stock had stabilized and begun recovering, while Global Trans faced class action lawsuits from shareholders, discrimination victims, and former acquisition targets. The predator had become the prey, with financial analysts predicting potential bankruptcy if the litigation damages reached expected levels. Global Trans and European Airways scrambled to contain the damage, but their coordination became increasingly evident as more internal documents emerged. European Airways CEO William Bradshaw held a press conference announcing the termination of all employees involved in the Passenger Comfort Initiative, presenting it as the action of rogue employees rather than corporate policy. The attempt at damage control fell apart when journalists presented him with emails showing his personal approval of the program and its metrics for success. Richard Holloway similarly attempted to distance himself from the scandal, claiming he had no knowledge of any targeting strategy involving Marcus Washington. His carefully crafted denials collapsed when financial records revealed payments from Global Trans to Holloway coinciding exactly with Marcus's flight dates. The coordinated attempts at deniability served only to confirm the systemic nature of the conspiracy, strengthening Marcus's position with each failed cover-up. Victor Harrington, Global Trans's CEO, remained conspicuously silent, issuing statements only through legal representatives who emphasized that all corporate actions had been within regulatory guidelines. The defensive posture merely underscored his accountability as more evidence emerged connecting him directly to the orchestrated campaign against Marcus and other minority entrepreneurs. The scandal grew so large that the Senate Commerce Committee, under immense public pressure, called for hearings on discrimination in the airline industry and predatory corporate practices targeting minority-owned businesses. The proceedings would be televised nationally, bringing unprecedented attention to issues long ignored by mainstream media and regulatory bodies. Marcus Washington, Jessica Kim, Elaine Johnson, and Michael Torres, now recovered enough to travel, were called as primary witnesses, alongside representatives from European Airways, Global Trans Holdings, and Sentinel Strategic. The cavernous hearing room buzzed with tension as senators from both parties prepared their questions, many clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight now shining on corporate practices that had benefited their campaigns through generous donations. Committee Chairman Senator Robert Mitchell opened the proceedings with an uncharacteristically direct statement. These hearings will investigate allegations of systematic discrimination and predatory business practices that, if proven true, represent not just ethical failures but potential violations of federal law. No American should face discrimination based on race, and no business should weaponize prejudice for corporate gain. European Airways sent their most polished executives to represent the company, led by Senior Vice President Catherine Bennett, known for her crisis management skills and telegenic presence. Her testimony presented a carefully crafted narrative of isolated incidents and misunderstandings. European Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, Bennett stated with practiced sincerity. The unfortunate incident involving Dr. Washington resulted from a booking system error that was poorly handled by staff who have since been terminated. She emphasized the airline's commitment to diversity and inclusion, citing recently implemented training programs and hiring initiatives while skillfully avoiding any acknowledgement of the Passenger Comfort Initiative or its documented outcomes. When pressed by Senator Diane Jackson about the pattern of similar incidents, Bennett expressed deep regret for any passenger who felt mistreated, while maintaining that these regrettable situations reflected individual failures rather than company policy. The semantic dance continued as Bennett offered carefully worded apologies that expressed sympathy without admitting liability, subtly shifting blame to individual employees and even to passengers for misinterpreting standard procedures. When Marcus took the witness stand, the contrast was immediate and powerful. Rather than defensive corporate doublespeak, he presented clear, factual testimony supported by documentation and data. What happened to me on Flight 2187 was not an isolated incident or a misunderstanding, Marcus stated, his voice steady and authoritative. It was the application of an explicit policy designed to maintain racial homogeneity in premium cabins by finding pretexts to remove passengers of color. Marcus presented the internal European Airways documents Michael Torres had provided, showing how the Passenger Comfort Initiative tracked and rewarded crew members based on demographic balance maintenance in first class and business class sections. Performance evaluation specifically noted flight attendants who successfully managed cabin demographics through seat reassignments. Most damning was the statistical analysis showing that passengers of color were 27 times more likely to be downgraded from premium cabins than white passengers, a disparity far too extreme to be coincidental. Marcus connected this policy to Global Trans's broader strategy of targeting minority entrepreneurs, demonstrating how his humiliation on the flight had been deliberately engineered as the first step in devaluing Regan Med Technologies for acquisition. The committee members seemed skeptical of Marcus's allegations until Michael Torres provided his testimony, revealing that he had been wearing a wire during the past 6 months as part of a Department of Justice investigation. I've been gathering evidence for federal prosecutors since discovering the discriminatory policies last year, Torres explained, his voice still weak from his injuries but his determination evident. What began as my personal concern about how we were treating passengers expanded when I discovered the connection to Global Trans and their targeting strategy. Torres described the systematic pressure on flight crews to maintain passenger comfort by ensuring first class remained predominantly white, with bonuses tied directly to achieving these unstated diversity quotas. He detailed the escalating threats he had received after contacting Marcus, culminating in the hit and run that had nearly killed him. They were willing to murder me to prevent this information from becoming public, Torres stated flatly. That level of violence demonstrates exactly how valuable this discrimination strategy was to their business model. The revelation of an ongoing federal investigation sent visible shockwaves through the European Airways representatives and their legal team, who immediately requested a recess to confer with their clients. Richard Holloway appeared before the committee projecting confident indignation, presenting himself as an innocent bystander wrongfully implicated in a controversy that had nothing to do with him. "I was simply a passenger on a flight," he insisted, his expensive suit and carefully modulated tone designed to convey trustworthiness and authority. "I had no knowledge of any targeting of Dr. Washington or any corporate strategy involving European Airways and Global Trans." Senator Mitchell pressed Holloway on his board positions with both companies, questioning the coincidence of his presence on that specific flight. "Mr. Holloway, are we to believe that you, as a board member of both companies involved in this incident, had no knowledge of the coordination between them regarding Dr. Washington?" As Holloway maintained his denial, Marcus's attorney, Elaine Johnson, requested permission to present evidence directly relevant to Holloway's testimony. She produced financial records showing payments from Global Trans to Holloway's consulting firm coinciding exactly with the dates surrounding Marcus's flight, along with emails between Holloway and Victor Harrington specifically discussing the Washington situation and the cabin demographic adjustment being arranged. Under this direct challenge to his testimony, Holloway's composure finally cracked. "Look, every business has competitive strategies," he snapped defensively. Washington was refusing acquisition offers that were more than generous given the chaos circumstances. Sometimes people need the incentives to recognize a good deal. The inadvertent admission of knowledge and involvement triggered audible gasps in the hearing room, with Holloway immediately attempting to backtrack and clarify his statement. The damage was done, however, as his previous denials now appeared to be deliberate perjury before a Senate committee. Victor Harrington, Global Trans's CEO and the alleged architect of the entire scheme, refused to appear personally before the committee, sending a team of corporate attorneys to represent the company's interests. Their prepared statement emphasized Global Trans's commitment to ethical business practices and categorically denied any coordinated effort to target Dr. Washington or other minority business owners. The legalistic evasions might have been effective in previous eras when corporate power remained largely unchallenged. However, Marcus had come prepared with documentary evidence directly contradicting these claims. He presented internal Global Trans communications in which Harrington personally selected Marcus for harassment because of their past history, explicitly referencing racial animus in emails to his executive team. "We need to show Washington that his kind can't play at our level," one particularly damning message read. "The airline incident is just the start. By the time we're done, he'll be grateful for any offer we make." The emails detailed the comprehensive strategy to destroy Marcus's reputation, manipulate Regan Med's stock price, and acquire the company at a fraction of its value, with specific references to similar campaigns against other minority-owned businesses. The evidence left no doubt about the systematic nature of Global Trans's predatory practices, or Harrington's personal involvement in orchestrating them. As the hearings extended into their second week, they evolved from a limited investigation into a wide-ranging examination of corporate discrimination across multiple industries. Additional witnesses came forward with similar experiences, creating a comprehensive picture of how racial bias was weaponized for corporate advantage throughout American business. The proceedings became a national sensation, with millions of viewers following the testimony, and social media platforms flooded with personal accounts of discrimination in corporate settings. The hashtag #corporate racism trended globally as people shared their own experiences of systemic barriers, biased treatment, and professional undermining based on race or ethnicity. What had begun as one black executive's refusal to accept humiliation on an airplane had catalyzed a long overdue national conversation about the economic costs of discrimination and the machinery of power that perpetuated it. For Marcus Washington, sitting in the hearing room surrounded by others who had faced similar battles, there was both vindication and sorrow. The system he was fighting had damaged countless careers and dreams before his, many without the resources or platform he possessed to fight back effectively. The hearings weren't just about his personal justice anymore. They represented a potential turning point in corporate accountability for discrimination that had long been hidden behind carefully crafted public images and legal maneuvering. the Department of Justice announced formal investigations into European Airways, Global Trans Holdings, and Sentinel Strategic 2 days after the Senate hearings concluded. Federal agents simultaneously executed search warrants at all 3 corporate headquarters, seizing servers, documents, and electronic devices related to the discrimination policies and predatory acquisition strategies. Attorney General Rebecca Simmons held a press conference outlining the serious nature of the allegations, including potential violations of civil rights laws, securities regulations, and racketeering statutes. The evidence presented during the ADE Senate hearing suggests a systematic effort to weaponize racial discrimination for corporate advantage, Simmons stated. If proven, these allegations represent not just ethical failures, but criminal conspiracies that the Justice Department will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. The unprecedented scale of the investigation reflected the extraordinary evidence Marcus Washington and his allies had assembled, creating accountability that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier when he had stood alone against these corporate giants. European Airways experienced the most immediate and visible collapse. The company's stock plummeted 63% in the 2 weeks following the hearings, as the full extent of their discriminatory practices became public. CEO William Bradshaw resigned in disgrace, followed by most of the executive leadership team as internal documents continued to emerge, showing their knowledge and approval of the Passenger Comfort Initiative. Multiple executives faced criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations, with several mid-level managers agreeing to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. As passengers canceled reservations and corporate clients terminated contracts, European Airways faced a liquidity crisis that threatened its continued operation. Flight attendants and other frontline employees, many of whom had objected to the discriminatory policies but feared retaliation, filed their own lawsuit against the company for creating a hostile work environment that forced them to choose between their ethics and their livelihoods. The airline that had once seemed untouchable now fought desperately for survival, its reputation irrevocably damaged by the exposure of its systematic discrimination. Michael Torres's evidence unleashed a flood of class action lawsuits from discrimination victims, with more than 500 documented cases where European Airways had deliberately mistreated passengers of color. Elaine Johnson coordinated these legal actions, ensuring that the plaintiffs received not just financial compensation, but public acknowledgement of the harm they had experienced. For many of these individuals, the damage wasn't just the humiliation of a single incident, Johnson explained to reporters. It was the psychological toll of being told they were imagining things, being too sensitive, or playing the race card when they complained about their treatment. This validation matters as much as any monetary settlement. The lawsuits uncovered additional evidence that European Airways had maintained a secret database of customer complaints related to discrimination, categorizing them by perceived threat level and developing standardized responses designed to dissuade further action. This systematic approach to containing discrimination complaints, rather than addressing their root causes, represented a corporate culture so deeply committed to maintaining biased practices that it had created elaborate mechanisms to protect them from scrutiny or reform. Global Trans Holdings faced an even more extensive reckoning as shareholders revolted against leadership that had exposed the company to massive legal and financial liability. Their predatory practices against minority-owned businesses triggered additional federal investigations beyond the European Airways connection, including potential antitrust violations and securities fraud. Major institutional investors publicly divested from Global Trans, citing both ethical concerns and fiduciary responsibility to avoid companies facing such significant legal exposure. The company's board of directors, finally recognizing the existential threat to the corporation, forced Victor Harrington's resignation, attempting to distance themselves from the architect of their predatory strategies. Harrington disappeared overseas before federal authorities could serve him with subpoenas, reportedly fleeing to a property in the Cayman Islands beyond immediate reach of U.S. law enforcement. The man who had orchestrated attacks on dozens of minority entrepreneurs now became a fugitive himself, his empire crumbling in his absence as investigators uncovered decades of systematic corporate malfeasance extending far beyond the campaign against Marcus Washington. As Marcus appeared to triumph against seemingly insurmountable odds, a final desperate attack emerged from the shadows. During a press conference where Marcus was discussing the ongoing investigations and reform efforts, a security guard posing as event staff approached the podium with what appeared to be a bottle of water. Jessica Kim, standing at the side of the stage, noticed the man's nervous behavior and the unnatural way he held his hand inside his jacket. "Marcus, look out!" she shouted as the fake guard pulled a knife from his concealed holster. The warning gave Marcus just enough time to step back as security personnel tackled the would-be assassin. In the ensuing chaos, the attacker managed to escape the building, but dropped a mobile phone that forensic analysis later connected directly to Sentinel Strategic's encrypted communication network. The attempt on Marcus's life, captured on dozens of cameras from media covering the press conference, horrified the public and eliminated any remaining doubt about the deadly seriousness of the forces Marcus had challenged. The image of a black CEO nearly assassinated for exposing corporate discrimination became a powerful symbol of both the violent lengths to which privilege would go to protect itself and the courage required to stand against it. The public response to the assassination attempt transformed what had been a significant business scandal into a defining national moment. Corporate sponsors abandoned European Airways en masse, unwilling to associate their brands with a company now linked to both discrimination and violence. Global Trans stock lost 60% of its value in a single week as investors fled, with financial analysts predicting potential bankruptcy as litigation costs and damages mounted. Sentinel Strategic, its methodologies and client relationships, exposed to public scrutiny, faced criminal investigations in multiple jurisdictions for corporate espionage, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit assault. Companies that had previously employed similar firms for crisis management rushed to terminate these relationships, fearing their own exposure in the growing demand for corporate accountability. What had begun as one executive's refusal to accept humiliation had catalyzed a fundamental reassessment of how power operated in American business, particularly in its treatment of minority entrepreneurs and executives. Despite the public vindication and the accelerating collapse of his enemies, Marcus continued to receive death threats promising this wasn't over. Even with police protection and private security, his family remained at risk from those desperate to silence him before further revelations emerged. Security experts advised relocating the family until the legal proceedings concluded, potentially years in the future. As Marcus reviewed these recommendations in his home office, surrounded by the visible signs of the ordeal they had endured, security cameras, reinforced windows, panic buttons in every room, he contemplated the cost of his stand against injustice. His children still suffered nightmares from the violations of their privacy and safety. Gabrielle carried the constant vigilance of a former prosecutor who understood exactly how vulnerable they remained. Regan Med Technologies, though recovering financially, had lost months of research and development momentum during the crisis. Many of Marcus's professional relationships had been strained or broken by the pressure of the controversy. Looking at a family photo taken before their world had been upended by that fateful flight, Marcus wondered whether justice was worth the continuing danger to those he loved. The question had no simple answer, but as he traced his children's smiling faces in the photograph, he recognized that his fight was fundamentally about their future, about whether they would inherit a world where power could act with impunity against those it deemed unworthy of equal treatment. That recognition renewed his determination to see the battle through to its conclusion, whatever personal cost he might bear. 6 months after the Senate hearings, the landscape had transformed in ways few could have imagined when Marcus Washington was first removed from his first-class seat on European Airways Flight 2187. European Airways, unable to recover from the reputational damage and facing billions in legal liabilities, had been acquired by International Air Group, a competitor that pledged comprehensive reform under new leadership. All executives involved in the discrimination policies faced criminal charges, with several now serving prison sentences after pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against higher-level conspirators. Most significantly, the airline industry had instituted new anti-discrimination protocols with external auditing and transparency requirements, creating accountability that extended far beyond European Airways to address similar issues throughout commercial aviation. Flight attendants' unions had successfully negotiated protections for employees who reported discriminatory practices, ensuring that whistleblowers like Michael Torres would find institutional support rather than retaliation in the future. These systematic changes, while insufficient to erase decades of discriminatory treatment, represented meaningful progress toward an industry where passengers would be treated with equal dignity, regardless of their race or ethnicity. Global Trans Holdings had experienced an even more dramatic fall, its predatory business model collapsing under legal scrutiny and shareholder revolt. The once mighty conglomerate had been dissolved, its assets sold off to satisfy legal judgments and shareholder claims. Victor Harrington, after months as a fugitive, was finally apprehended attempting to board a private yacht bound for a non-extradition country. Federal prosecutors charged him with multiple counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, and civil rights violations, with potential sentences totaling over 100 years if convicted on all counts. The SEC investigation revealed decades of corporate malfeasance extending far beyond the targeting of minority-owned businesses, including market manipulation, accounting fraud, and illegal competitive practices. Former Global Trans executives, seeking leniency in their own cases, provided devastating testimony about Harrington's direct orders to target companies based on the founder's race, with explicit instructions to exploit societal prejudice as a business advantage. The man who had orchestrated campaigns to destroy dozens of minority entrepreneurs now faced spending the remainder of his life in federal prison, his empire dismantled, and his reputation irredeemably tarnished. Marcus Washington testified before Congress again, this time advocating for legislation protecting minority business owners from predatory practices. His powerful testimony, combined with the overwhelming evidence from the Global Trans case, created rare bipartisan support for corporate accountability measures. The Washington Act, named in recognition of Marcus's pivotal role in exposing these practices, moved toward passage with support from both political parties. The legislation established enhanced penalties for discriminatory business practices, created new protections for whistleblowers, and established an independent review process for mergers and acquisitions involving minority-owned businesses to prevent predatory targeting. This legislation isn't about special treatment, Marcus explained during committee hearings. It's about acknowledging and addressing the specific vulnerabilities created by historical and ongoing discrimination in our economic system. When we pretend these vulnerabilities don't exist, we enable predators to exploit them with impunity. The pending legislation represented a tangible policy outcome from Marcus's ordeal, potentially protecting future entrepreneurs from experiencing similar targeted attacks based on their race or ethnicity. Regan Med Technologies had recovered fully under Marcus's continued leadership, emerging from the crisis with strengthened corporate governance and enhanced ethical commitments. Their Japanese partnership had yielded breakthrough technology in neural interfaces for spinal cord injuries, with clinical trials showing unprecedented success in restoring mobility to previously paralyzed patients. The company's stock price had not only recovered, but reached new highs as investors recognized both the value of their innovations and the demonstrated resilience of their leadership team. Marcus established the Regan Med Foundation, dedicating $20 million to helping minority entrepreneurs navigate corporate challenges and access capital without vulnerability to predatory practices. The foundation provided legal resources, mentorship, and emergency funding for business owners facing discriminatory tactics, creating systematic support for those who might otherwise fight these battles alone. What happened to me wasn't unique, Marcus explained at the foundation's launch. What was unique was having the resources to fight back effectively. This foundation ensures that every entrepreneur has those resources, regardless of their personal wealth or connections. Jessica Kim received tenure at Stanford and established a research center studying corporate discrimination and its economics impacts. Her academic work quantified the massive cost of discriminatory practices, not just to individual victims but to the broader economy through lost innovation, market distortions, and inefficient resource allocation. The center's research provided empirical foundation for policy reforms while training a new generation of scholars committed to economic justice. Michael Torres, fully recovered from his injuries, declined multiple lucrative job offers to instead lead a nonprofit supporting whistleblowers in the transportation industry. His organization provided legal representation, financial support, and personal security for employees who risked their livelihoods and safety to expose wrongdoing within their companies. "The system only changes when brave individuals speak up," Torres often said in his public appearances. "Our mission is to ensure they don't stand alone when they do." His work created institutional support for the individual courage that had nearly cost him his life when he first decided to expose European Airways' discriminatory practices. At the signing ceremony for the Washington Act, surrounded by allies who had become friends through their shared battle, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey from humiliation on that flight to changing the system that had enabled it. President Eleanor Mitchell, the first black woman to hold the office, handed Marcus the pen after signing the legislation into law. "This wouldn't have happened without your courage," she told him quietly, away from the microphones. "Sometimes, it takes one person refusing to accept injustice to create change for everyone." As Marcus accepted the historic pen, he spotted a familiar face watching from the back of the Rose Garden ceremony. Veronica Keller, the flight attendant whose dismissive treatment had initiated the entire saga, stood quietly observing the proceedings. After serving 6 months in federal prison for her role in the discrimination policy and her testimony against higher-level executives, she had contacted Marcus, requesting a meeting. Against his attorney's advice, Marcus had agreed to see her. "I didn't expect to see you here," Marcus said when they spoke privately after the ceremony. Veronica's expression carried the weight of genuine remorse rather than the defensive anger she had shown during the early stages of the controversy. "I wanted to see it happen," she replied simply, "and to thank you. What you didn't just expose European Airways. It freed a lot of us who were caught in a system we knew was wrong, but felt powerless to change." She explained how flight attendants had faced impossible choices between enforcing discriminatory policies or losing their careers, with management creating plausible deniability while establishing clear expectations through incentives and evaluations. "That doesn't excuse what I did to you," she added quickly. "I made choices I have to live with. But watching you fight back gave others the courage to stop participating in a broken system." Her apology carried the authenticity of someone who had lost everything, faced consequences, and emerged with genuine understanding rather than merely seeking absolution. "I hope someday the industry we build from these ashes treats everyone with the dignity they deserve," she concluded before quietly leaving the celebration. The story came full circle 1 year after the original incident, when Marcus boarded another flight, but this time as the airline's honored guest, invited to consult on their new inclusion practices as part of International Air Group's comprehensive reforms. The company had made structural changes to eliminate biased treatment, including removing subjective criteria from upgrade policies, implementing blind customer service evaluation metrics, and creating robust accountability for discrimination complaints. Marcus had agreed to help not for personal vindication, but because systematic change required ongoing vigilance and expertise from those who understood the subtle ways bias operated in organizational cultures. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant approached with genuine warmth. "Dr. Washington, welcome aboard. We're honored to have you with us today." The simple greeting, delivered with authentic respect, symbolized the transformed environment his courage had helped create. Marcus smiled and thanked her, knowing that the true measure of progress wasn't how he personally was treated, but how the system would respond to the next passenger who didn't have a CEO's resources or public platform. When facing discrimination, the battle wasn't over. Systematic injustice never yielded completely to a single victory. But meaningful change had taken root in an industry that had previously operated with impunity. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Marcus reflected that sometimes justice began with a single person refusing to accept humiliation as the price of participation in American life. That refusal, sustained against overwhelming pressure and potentially devastating consequences, could ultimately transform systems that had seemed immovable. The flight lifted smoothly into the air, carrying Marcus Washington toward new challenges in a world he had helped to change. This extraordinary journey of Marcus Washington teaches us profound lessons about courage, systemic discrimination, and the power of refusing to accept injustice. First, it shows that discrimination remains deeply embedded in corporate America. often weaponized as a business tactic against minority entrepreneurs. Second, it reveals how powerful institutions rely on silence and isolation to maintain discriminatory practices. When victims speak up collectively and document abuses, these systems can be disrupted. Third, it demonstrates that true allies are essential. Jessica's documentation, Michael's whistleblowing, and Elaine's legal expertise were all crucial to Marcus's eventual victory. The story also highlights how wealth and status provide no immunity from racial bias. Despite Marcus's success as a CEO, he was still vulnerable to humiliation based solely on his race. It shows the extraordinary lengths to which power will go to protect itself when challenged, from surveillance to character assassination to physical violence. Perhaps most importantly, this case demonstrates that individual courage, while necessary, isn't sufficient. Lasting change requires institutional reform, policy changes, and cultural transformation. The Washington Act and industry-wide reforms represent the transition from individual justice to systemic change. Finally, this story teaches us that standing against discrimination carries real costs and dangers, but the alternative, accepting injustice as inevitable, carries even greater costs for future generations. By refusing to be silenced despite threats to everything he valued, Marcus created possibilities for more equal treatment that extended far beyond his personal situation, transforming a moment of humiliation into a movement for justice. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had the courage to speak up? Or perhaps you've been the target of bias and felt powerless to fight back. The story of Marcus Washington reminds us that while standing against injustice is never easy, it's how systems ultimately change. Drop a comment sharing your own experience with discrimination or a time when you witnessed someone standing up against it. Type "courage" if you believe one person's refusal to accept injustice can create ripples of change throughout an entire system. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that expose the reality of racism in America and celebrate those brave enough to fight it. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that their voice matters in the ongoing struggle for equality. Thank you for listening to Marcus's journey. Remember that in the face of systemic discrimination, your courage to speak truth to power might be the catalyst that begins transforming an unjust system. Together, we can build a world where dignity isn't determined by the color of one's skin,